Congratulations, viewer. You may not know it yet, but you've just clicked on the most important playlist in RPG history. Here's the pitch. I want to turn your current D&D adventure path, module, or homebrew campaign into a community. Let me ask you, do you have 20 to 50 players in your D&D campaign? Why not? That's what the game was designed for. That was the style of play, the correct style of play, called a grand campaign. Grand campaigns are living worlds where standardized rule set, patrons, and multiple referees foment organic play with a huge roster of dungeons, armies, factions, and all the other ingredients of a campaign bigger than any one person's vision. They are built, they are designed to support a community of players across vast distances and multiple tiers of play for the greatest number of people for the longest possible time. We're going to spend the rest of this video defining the concept, its effects on adventure material, how players respond to it, and describe the sort of folks who don't like this style of play, who don't like playing correctly. What we're not going to do is explain why you might want to have a community full of referees, players, and NPCs all working in friendly competition with one another. If y'all don't get it, just try it out. Or don't, I guess. It's okay, because not everyone can play at this level. Or maybe y'all looked at being a referee and said, well, that looks like a lot of work, I could never do that. I promise y'all, it only looks intimidating. Organizing, running, and playing in a grand campaign, and you can do all three, is fun. It's not that hard once you know how to participate, and that's why I'm here. That's what this playlist is for, to teach y'all how to switch from conventional play, with boring, pre-plotted events for your players to suffer through, to a world where you might not know who's running that night, and nobody knows exactly what will happen. We have a lot of ground to cover, but keep this one point in mind throughout the entire video. The grand campaign is bigger than any one person's vision. Now, I have 40 episodes planned for this series about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of running this style of play, but if y'all are willing to stick around, I'll give you the broad strokes. And if y'all want this playlist to show up in your feed, do not delay. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and get ready to share this with people you want to play with. Our first order of business in defining the grand campaign is pretty simple. Grand campaigns don't have hard lines on what counts as a group, or who's allowed to be a referee, or even the right time to play. It doesn't matter if your favorite cleric is online or not. If 4 people you just met want to kill a dragon, it's time to play. If none of the usual people who run are available, it's up to the players to shore up their ranks and run for their friends. In this style of play, DM burnout doesn't kill the adventure, and with more people willing to run or give advice or otherwise share the burden, maybe even at the same time, DM burnout happens less often. What's more, y'all usually don't just have one character in a grand campaign. You're not chained to a single rogue you made at the module start, desperate for your DM to kill your character so y'all can roll up a new one. Because parties are so fluid, you'll need to dust off whatever character y'all left at the docks. Because there's been a string of murders there recently and everyone wants to take a crack at solving the case. Your old cleric down at the docks wasn't working out, they didn't feel powerful or cool enough, but say your rogue is stuck across the mountains. Now your cleric nearby the adventure's starting location starts looking pretty good. Another distinction between grand campaigns and conventional RPG practices is that grand campaigns are not about a single narrative or plot. The world is complex, with many people, nations, and factions vying for power and the completion of their own goals and win conditions. Players in a grand campaign might focus on a serial killer down by the docks who turns out to be a vampire, but they can drop that thread in favor of the local mega-dungeon or confronting the army of Lord Soth. The players are ultimately motivated either by their own goals or the goals of their favorite fellow players, and sometimes both. Adventuring is just a means to get a wizard tower, access to forbidden spells, to conquer a rival nation. The goal for players in a grand campaign is to carve their name onto the map, and this changes the adventuring material they get to play. A vampire left to continue preying on dock workers becomes stronger, changes locations, amasses henchmen, maybe recruits an army of their own. Then it's out of any one player character's hands, or even a single group's hands, but it's not the end of the campaign. The vampire becomes just one more faction on a map, It's already filled with at least half a dozen NPCs, and they're all the heroes of their own story. But the vampire does trade hands. See, when the vampire changes locations, he's more important to adventurers in that region. When he starts collecting henchmen, he becomes a problem for players with thieves or assassins guilds of their own. When the vampire gets an army, he's a problem for one player with a keep, and if the vampire gets that keep, he's a problem for whoever his lordly neighbor is. See, adventure material for the grand campaign is fractal in a way. It allows very high-level forces to duke it out with one another in ways that trickle down to the lowest players rather than obliterating them and their will to play in one swell swoop. In conventional play, failing to stop the vampire lore represents the end of a campaign. There's no way your players can feasibly fight off an army of undead all on their lonesome, but in the grand campaign, this is just a complicating factor for the player characters. Players who own factions have their lieutenants turned into thralls, or worse. Businesses and other location-based sources of income bring in reduced profits. Random encounter tables in regions controlled by or adjacent to said vampire start to skew towards more powerful undead enemies. While high-level PCs duke it out in mass combat and try to establish a foothold in enemy territory, a minor villain in the Vampire Lord's power structure could be the center of a new power struggle versus lower-level player characters. If said minor villain goes unchecked, maybe they strike it out on their own and they end up rebelling against their lord. Now that's all just assuming the vampire or their subsequent minor villain is hostile, by the way. Maybe the vampire is trying to take down some greater evil. Maybe the minor commander is inspired to rebel by your players. The fractal nature of high-level play dispenses consequences and adventure material to every tier of play simultaneously by regenerating the campaign world and presenting ambitious players with a continuous stream of opportunities and rewards. Now, it's important that I clarify to you right now that conventional RPG practices do not support this style of play or the people who enjoy it. See, conventional play derisively calls these players power gamers, people who will interrupt your special monologue in favor of moving the game along, who won't cooperate with your vision for the game. But a singular vision for the game is not why we play tabletop RPGs. We play because it lets us stretch the bounds past what's possible in video games, comic books, or movies, not to play a worse version of all three. I'd be perfectly happy playing Titanfall 2 and Warhammer 3 until the end of time, but the grand campaign lets me lead the militia of 20-foot-tall robots, or take an army's lord through a dungeon with heroes of similar caliber. A Left 4 Dead-style game about killing ratmen can't be combined with a 4X strategy game about burning down their homeland, even if they're in the same setting. Video games can't do it, but tabletop role-playing games can, and especially if you're running a grand campaign. Now, aside from the narrative threads, fractal nature of grand campaigns, and distinguishing this style of play from conventional RPG practices, this series will also focus on the logistics of running a grand campaign. This isn't all just theory. Grand campaigns are reliant on a few key practices to ensure this game runs smoothly. Timekeeping rules are necessary to keep the campaign moving forward and coordinate campaign events between multiple referees. The referees maintain a roster of patrons, quest giver NPCs controlled by people outside the table who invent new material for your players to engage with and make sure they get paid for doing so. Factions and guilds introduce regular shifts and priorities for your players and patrons, ensuring their end goals never calcify and there's always more to interact with in the campaign. Dungeons must be made with limited time and adventure opportunities in mind. Players need to be presented with options in downtime. The world must be populated with challenges and adventures to engage with. And finally, all referees involved must use the same rule set when running the game. All of the aforementioned are significant logistical challenges. You wouldn't be able to manage all of these issues yourself, but luckily, every single one of these has been solved already through play and play reports, and each will get their own episode along with many, many others. Well, I sure hope everyone's excited to learn more about the right way to play. It's the end of dead-end campaigns, failure to launch succession campaigns, not having enough players, not having enough referees, railroads, all of it. We are doing away with isolated tables, never interacting with the wider hobby and instead returning to a community. 50 years of bad RPG habits are coming to an end right here on this channel. I have a longer list of thanks to give on this episode, and I couldn't be happier about it. Tony, Bruno, Joe, Jacob, Andrew, and Dennis, thank you all so much for playing in my paid Lancer game. Thanks as well to Durian the Sleepy, who supports me on Patreon. You can find that link in the description. I'd also like to thank my Discord, another link in the description, the players of my Chill Miss Valley campaign, who've graciously acted as my guinea pigs for grand campaigns and playtested my Chill Miss Valley module. Thanks to Jeffro Johnson, John Mollison, B-Dubs, Mephrodis, and the rest of the Pro SR crew who set me on this path and taught me a great deal along the way. Thanks to Aaron the Pedantic who got me started on YouTube. And finally, thanks to Blue Dot Sessions for the music, and a very hearty thank you to Mariana for the art. Oh man, already. Are you still here, partner? Alright, I'll be spending a little bit of time at the end here, this little epilogue, to address new players in my very own grand campaign, which is currently ongoing. They need to be introduced to the concept, and you, the viewer, need to know how to introduce other people to grand campaigns, but I didn't want to front-load this kind of stuff in a video that's supposed to be not necessarily generic, but is supposed to be instructional in nature, more high-level. It's not supposed to deal with the specifics of my campaign. I'm supposed to teach you all how to run your own. But it's best that I demonstrate how that's done, at the very least here at the end. I run a game called Chill Miss Valley, set in a region of my world called Samaid. It's paradise to anyone who's ever heard of it, but Samaid has problems now. A sheet of ice and frost is blanketing the land. 2 spires at the valley's northern end were blessed to provide sunlight year-round, but now those spires are freezing over. What's more, areas of the surface have begun sinking into the world below, and a dwarven empire to the east has begun invading as well. It's a complicated game to say the least, but you'll feel right at home in a session or two. To give you the short primer, the cause of the frost spreading throughout the valley is the Hyboreal Court, a court of winter fae whose nobody's seen in 1,000 years. They initially pushed out the Clover Court, a court of summer fae who moved into the valley shortly after the Hyboreal Court left, shortly after the valley was blessed by a god of the sun, now long forgotten. The valley had grown dependent on the Clover Court for magic and power, and so when those guys left, the valley suddenly needed adventurers. Thanks to the actions of our heroes, some of the Clover Court have been recovered and are stemming the tide of the frost. Additionally, our players have been reactivating sun shrines to magnify the valley's blessing, bathing the valley for miles around in intense sunlight. Meanwhile, various houses of the Deep Elves have been stirring in the world below, hell-bent on war. Through infernal machines and corrupted plant life, they sever the pillars, keeping the world above and the world below separated, sinking miles of terrain directly into their territory. Some of the players have actually taken to a line with drow houses so as to turn them against each other. The less these houses present a unified front, so the players think, the more warlords are replaced with peaceful monarchs, the less the world above has to worry about. Finally, there's a crazy, drunk, dwarven general who swore to reclaim lost territory in the valley. The players haven't had much to do with him so far. They don't really operate in that end of the valley right now, so it's pretty much all fine. Now, if you're preparing to play or run in this campaign, your top priority should be to just join a session, stake out a goal, research a spell, get a magic item, build a castle, and jump headfirst into it. Whatever the collection of proper names and nouns you come across first is, gets to be your introduction to the campaign, gets to be your focus. If you hear about something that sounds up your alley in some other region of the campaign map, just ask another player to help you ride along. Alright, this campaign has a lot of material to sink your teeth into, so I'm going to reiterate. Do not attempt to download all campaign information the moment you join. Don't even ask somebody, especially not me, to do it for you either. Jump into a session, play along with your new friends, see what cool shenanigans they're trying to pull off, and join in. The information you desire will come to you organically, just as Gygax intended. Without further ado, peace.